So here's something that might sound just a little bit strange. The worst thing you can do when you're starting to find your story is to share it with your friends and with your family. I know that might sound a little counterintuitive because after all, shouldn't we get feedback from the people we know best? Well, let me tell you why this could be the biggest mistake you could make. If you're new here, my name's Mike. I spent far too many years helping other people tell their stories before I had the actual courage, the nerve to tell my own. And today I want to talk to you about something that could save you quite a lot of time and frustration. Is while your story is your big story arc is taking shape, you're probably better to keep it to yourself. Many years ago, not to say many years ago, 1996, I was in Brittany, in France, eating frozen, poor, hard up, eating frozen burgers, and having the beginnings of an idea that perhaps I could be a translator, perhaps I could work for myself, having spectacularly really failed to work for other people in any meaningful kind of way. I did tell my parents at the time, and they were concerned, let's say, because how are you going to self-employed? What's all this stuff? In fact, throughout to the day she died, my mother asked me every time I spoke to her on the phone, she said to me, have you got any work? She never really understood what this whole self-employment thing was. Of course, I had the well-intentioned advice about getting a proper job, but I do actually consider this is far more of a proper job than any other corporate job that I could ever have, because I quite simply can't get fired. What's not to like? So generally, I kept it quiet, and it kind of took on a life of itself, and it grew over the years to be something very sustainable and very a good thing for me. It's what I needed to do to find my own happiness in work. And ultimately, it transformed my life. So let me tell you the three types of people that can accidentally destroy your story before it has any time to get going. First up, there's the practical friend. It's the person who loves you, who really wants the best from you, but doesn't understand what you're trying to do. They get concerned about job security. What happens if no one calls you? Well, they start talking to you about pension plans. To be honest, I was in my mid-30s at the time. Pension plan was the last thing I was thinking of. And these are all valid concerns of caring friends. But it's not what you want to hear when you are starting, in effect, a business and you are finally starting to earn some money of your own. Then there's the success expert. These are the people that have actually got somewhere. They've actually done something. Good for them. But they think that the way they did it is the only way possible, and it's the way that you should do it. Completely ignoring the fact that your personality, your skills, your experience are completely different to theirs. And it's like having a success template or a program that apply all these things and you will be a success. That's not true. They'll encourage you to think smaller or dream safer or take fewer risks, or alternatively to take far too many risks. I've known more than one business owner over the years who's been told by the people around them that what they're trying to do is just a hobby, and ultimately they're going to go and get a real job. Talking about clipping your wings before you can fly, actually that reminds me of a real example. There's a friend of mine who's in Spain now. In fact, I'll talk about her in Stories That Matter, the book, which you can find down below. Always wanted to be a dancer. One of these, a lot of 4, 5, 6-year-olds, they get this thing about dancing when they're young, and they grow out of it. Most kids do, but it never left her. When it came to when she was in her late teens, she still wanted to be a dancer, but succumbed to peer pressure, if you like, and went off and did a degree in Spanish and French because she thought that was practical. She's got a few jobs, hated them afterwards, and now she runs a burlesque school in Barcelona, and I think her family have finally begun to accept it. Because throughout that time, they were telling her, not just her parents, but her siblings as well, why don't you get a proper job? This is just a hobby. There's so many hobbies that make an awful lot of money, believe you me. But she ignored them all and she went with what she wanted to do. And now she's pretty successful at it as well. So when is the right time to share your story? I think there's 4 things I've learned to look for, both in my own journey and those of people I've worked with. The first one, this is again counterintuitive perhaps, you don't need approval to tell your story. You're never going to be ready as such. When I first started thinking about doing this, evolving from being a pure copywriter to being more of a storyteller, I was kind of looking for approval from other people. I was still looking for validation. But once I knew I could talk about it without that desperate need for others to understand, well then I knew I was ready. The second time is when you've tested it in private, safe spaces, if you like. I've worked with a lot of clients in an atmosphere of trust, and I've got them to open up to me firstly, because that creates a kind of an environment. It's almost a test environment. But once you've got it out there, then you can start playing with it. Then you can start to get comfortable with it. You can tell it in the way that feels best to you. There's another important point here as well, is if you're talking about problems, for example, make sure that they are former problems. There is no joy, there is nothing to be gained by talking about your current problems in public. Because, believe me, your audience is not your therapist, and you won't find any benefit in doing that. The third thing is when you're clear on your non-negotiables. What parts of your story won't you compromise on? We're coming back to the problems. I think once you've solved the problems, then you can talk about them, because they will no doubt be beneficial to other people. The big turning point for me was the realization that not just I had a story worth telling, but everybody else does as well. There's an audience for everybody out there. And you don't need to be a gazillionaire. You don't need to be super successful to have something worth saying, because to struggle is human. And there is going to be somebody who can relate to relate to the experience that you have, and will probably be a client for you, because once you've solved those problems, then you can go and solve them for other people. But if you don't talk about them, no one's ever going to know. The fourth thing is actually when you can take criticism about it, when you know your core, and you can take kickback from it. This doesn't mean you're not going to get a little bit hurt sometimes. I mean, I still do, but unfortunately, that is life. Your comfort zone is a beautiful place where nothing ever happens. So I like the idea of what Stephen Bartlett says about living on the outside, on the edge of his comfort zone, not jumping outside. That's silly, stupid even. It's pushing those boundaries, because the next time you go there, you will find it much easier. But don't let that criticism derail you. More than one person has told me that I'm too old to do this stuff. Sod that. I'm almost too young. A few years ago, that would have stopped me. Any kind of criticism like that, you can't do this because, I'd have believed people, but I don't anymore. It just confirms even more why my message matters to the people who are important to, who need to hear that message. Actually, when you first start this stuff, when you first start talking about your story, it's a new thing. It's almost like a newborn baby. It's vulnerable. It needs protection. It needs growing. It needs to grow strong before it faces the world. You need to become sure of it before you confident with it before you take it out into the world. It matters too much to be limited by other people's limitations and other people's fears. It needs to come from that quiet, strong place inside you that knows who you really are and what you're actually capable of. So here's what I'd like you to do. Take a week, just a week. Don't tell anybody that you're working on this, but take some time to write down elements of your story just for yourself, things you remember, things you've done, things you've achieved. Preferably use a notebook actually about it, because it's a bit more organic rather than typing it on a piece of paper. You'll probably find the words will come more naturally that way. But above all, don't filter yourself, don't judge yourself, don't give yourself well-meaning advice, don't say I should have done this or I should have done that. Just you and your truth, and be gentle with yourself. You'll be fine. Because here you're creating a private space where those thoughts can grow, because it's not just your story, it's your thoughts. Write it down, or even use voice notes if you like, because the technology is out there to transcribe voice notes in no time at all these days. The important thing is that it's just for you. So if you're ready to be part of a community that wants to kind of run with me on this and understands what this journey is all about, just hit the subscribe button. You know, it all helps the reach of everything. You know how the YouTube algorithm works. This channel is for the optimists who see the power of their stories and how that can change the world. Believe you me, your story has more power than you know. So drop a comment if anybody's ever given you any helpful advice that could have actually derailed your whole journey. Start a conversation about protecting your dreams as they grow, and your stories as they grow. And I'll see you in the next one.